Christina, thank you very, very much. And we are indeed incredibly delighted this morning to kick off with Kasper König and Christian Jankowski, who of course both need no introduction. We all know Kasper's hundreds of pioneering exhibitions, among them Andy Warhol in '68 in Stockholm, of course, such shows as Westkunst and von Hierhaus. And particularly relevant for the topic today, we're going to discuss of traces and fragments, not only Manifesta, but also the groundbreaking Skulpturenprojekte in Münster. So basically we're going to discuss, of course, as in the program, announce the topic of Manifesta, but we then also focus on Kasper's and Christian's other works, connecting them to our topic here. Christian Jankowski was born in Göttingen and is a leading visual artist, but now also the artistic director of Manifesta. So he makes Manifesta into an artist-run space, which is kind of fascinating, and we look very, very much forward to hearing more about that, but also hearing more about his work, which very often also work with moving image connects to the topic of fragments and traces. So we hear about that as well. Before I start, we have a grußwort, we have a message from Hedwig Fein. She says that she's very sorry that she cannot be here today. She's here in spirit. And basically she wanted to thank, of course, Christina Bechler, Beatrix Ruf, Daniel Baumann, and us all for actually inviting Manifesta to be part of this project. She also wanted to say that Manifesta exists now for 20 years, so happy birthday to Manifesta. And obviously, Manifesta is more relevant than ever in a Europe full of conflicts. And it is kind of interesting when I curated the first Manifesta with my colleagues, and I wasn't actually the director, the artistic director was Katalin Neray, the late Katalin Neray, to whom we should dedicate today's panel somehow in her memory. And together with my four colleagues and her, we developed this Manifesta at the beginning, and it was very much an idea of Henry Merrick Hughes, of René Bloch, and others, and they wanted to basically anchor a discussion, about art in Europe in a wider sense. It's a post-'89. So the focus obviously was very much also on Eastern Europe. Now the thing is that the coffee breaks, because you might wonder why we declare this a coffee break. It's a long tradition in Manifesta. When we did Manifesta we once said in the curatorial meeting, the most important thing always happens in the coffee breaks. And then Hedwig picked up on that and we started to do these coffee breaks, and I think for every Manifesta now, coffee break happens. So today is a coffee break, but obviously after the coffee break you can then have a coffee outside. There is always coffee at the end. Please give a very, very warm welcome now to Kasper König and Christian Jankowski.
Thank you very much for being invited. I have nothing to push. There's a song which is in the back of my mind when I came from München, stopped over in Bregenz, and came here. I don't know whose song it is, but it's a very kind of sentimental, beautiful song, and it goes like, I have nothing to complain, I'm riding on a train. So, what I would like to talk about is kind of timing. And the Manifesta, I happened to visit Manifesta in Rotterdam and was very much reminded of a very spectacular, aggressive piece in Rotterdam, in St. Petersburg, by Erik van Lieshout, a Dutch artist who is kind of an activist, and he's an interesting activist from the point of view of aesthetics, because he's not necessarily politically correct. His father was a social worker, and his brother a teacher, also very socially engaged in Eindhoven. And so he had an overdose of good intentions, I guess. And he became an artist, and he reflects on sociological kind of, psychological kind of situations. He has a twin brother who he's very much in competition with. And as it turned out, his twin brother became a committed homosexual, and he believed he had to prove the opposite. So all this is quite often embarrassing but interesting. And he told us, and there are many here from the team of St. Petersburg, which will always be a trace and a remnant, because it became a very kind of tight social situation in a precarious circumstances. And he told us about a work from Manifesta 1, where Oleg Kulik, a kind of avant-garde artist, a post-avant-garde artist from Moscow, who became quite known through a kind of a prank where they sort of damaged with vegetable colors a work of Malevich at the State Museum, kind of opposing the official kind of art world. And he was a dog, and he was on a leash, and he was supposedly biting people. And it was Eric who noticed this, and he was very impressed, because there were many kind of middle-aged women, children, and so on, mostly, Turkish migrants, who had never seen a kind of a naked man on the street pretending to be a dog. So they were culturally quite fascinated by this. I don't know if they were turned off, but they couldn't understand. And Eric watched the situation. He was 17 or 18, and he said he was very impressed that this guy Kulik was a fantastic dog. You see? It's like a Buster Keaton kind of performance. So from a formal point of view. And I just basically want to introduce Jankowski, who has been chosen for the first time as an artist to be responsible for Manifesta. And the history of Manifesta is obviously very much related to the Berlin Wall, which came down, and strangely enough is now in Zurich, which is sort of very much in the heart of Europe, but it is not part of the kind of European Union, which right now, on a kind of precarious way, might be even questions itself very much. So, what was interesting about St. Petersburg, I was asked among two other people who had previous kind of experience in a museum to make a proposal for the Manifesta 10 based on the 250th birthday of the Eremitage. So I had never been there, but I knew a lot of things about the Eremitage, about the films of the Revolution, or the Winter Palace, which is the Eremitage, about Erich von Klenz's wonderful building, which is completely together in every aspect. So the cultural history of St. Petersburg, Leningrad, St. Petersburg was familiar to me, but only second-hand. So when I made a proposal, it was an homage to kind of a time capsule. And I became very fascinated by this time capsule. And finally, I ended up making a proposal which dealt with this and dealt with the kind of anarcho chaos within a palace. It's not a museum, it's a palace. And it has always been a palace, and it looks like that it hopefully will maintain being a palace in terms of a feeling for the next 100 years to come. And the kind of conflict on a daily basis had very much to do with the fact that this palace maintained itself as a palace, and many promises were not kept, because it was just what you do in a palace. You promise something, but things are different. And there are different speeds involved. And so the traces are kind of melancholic. However, the experience might be very positive, let's say, for the next generation, 5 years or something like that. So I decided not to show any pictures, and basically then talk about another period, which is Münster, which happened for the first time in 1977. And I was born at the very end of the war, and from a point of view of being kind of West Germany, which is now larger than that, sort of the end of the Nazi time was really 68, 69, which is clearly sort of agreed upon by historians and sociologists and so on with good arguments. That was pretty much the question you had towards your parents, what happened, during the Nazi time. So 77 is already sort of a decade later than the late 60s. And the reason for this exhibition was a particular social problem where a sculpture was promised to the University of Henry Moore, and they turned it down because they didn't want it to be too much zeitgeist. And that had to do with two different speeds. That of the city, which was more like a merchant city, and they wanted to, life goes on, make business, and the university, who pretended not to be involved in Nazi ideology, which they were totally involved in, and pretended to override the situation. So it was a psychological conflict, which Klaus Russmann, who was the curator at the time, understood it was necessary to educate and to talk about the history of modern sculpture from Rodin to Corda in a head-on, high-quality level. So then I got involved in the contemporary part and so on. So I'm interested much more in the notion of traces on a very high, the highest possible level from an aesthetic point of view, but so that it has a kind of plausibility to people who are curious. Not arrogant, but at the same time not at all condescending, not making compromises at all, to be head-on, and the quality of the stuff which were made happens to be very high, and it's not this attitude, hey, look at me, I'm a work of art. It goes to sleep, and then it can wake up. And none of these commissions, which were given to artists to commission themselves, were made for durability. They were all made as an intervention, but quite a number of them actually remained. So this as an introduction, and then we can later talk about different timing and the subject about Spuren and Fragments.
Kasper, thank you so much, and indeed we hope we can then further go into depth with Münster in relation to traces and fragments, because obviously you have exhibitions like Manifesta, which are nomadic biennales. They go from city to city, and that's very much what Etienne Balibar once described to me when he says in relation to nomadic exhibitions that actually exhibitions to become nomadic physically and mentally traveling across the borders, that means they can also go beyond national boundaries, they can allow languages and culture to spill in all directions, to broaden the horizon of translating capacities. In his own word, exhibitions would vanish in their intervention. They would be necessary, but without monopoly, they would be borderlines themselves. So the idea that a nomadic biennale like Manifesta can kind of become a borderline is interesting. Obviously an exhibition which is more, not permanent, but which happens again and again in the same place can create another form of traces. But in a way, it leads us right away to Christian Jankowski, because Christian has come up with a completely new rule of the game for the Manifesta, which will create actually a long-term sustainable impact, as far as I understand, in terms of the community in Zurich, by bringing together artists with all kinds of practitioners from all kinds of disciplines. So Christian, maybe you can tell us a little bit about this concept.
Hello. Under the title What People Do for Money, I connect different artists with professions, and it already started now, almost a year ago that the first people were invited, and more people are making connections now. They chose different fields, and we looked as Manifesta for those different professions, and now they're all in their relations and also problems are developing, but also we have many projects already secured. So in terms of the title where we talk about the fragments, I think that this exhibition also consists of very different ways how you are involved with Manifesta 11. So it's possible that you might sing in the gospel choir in Zurich, and suddenly you hear through a project from a Spanish artist, Carlos Congos, who's trying to bring together an artwork which involves the Zurich Fire Department, White Gospel Choir in Zurich, and Tina Turner, to work together on one project where he found a connection with fire, for instance, financial independence, retirement early. And then of course with the gospel background where all of the songs are basically invented from the slavery times and now be interpreted by Zurich inhabitants. So there are very connections that at the first place when you involve or you come with these artistic ideas, for many people start with a big question mark, how should this work and what is the purpose and so on. But I think that's also the quality that we are not bringing up like one topic and we have one channel to communicate about this exhibition, but you have different traces, so different options how you are hearing about this exhibition, or you're in the police department, suddenly the boss in the police department is looking under his colleagues for policemen who are willing to do a theater or a film group and learn something about method acting, and then they actually shoot a surrealistic movie in the Kantonspolizei Zürich. Another one we are working with, the sewage waste treatment plant, this is the right word in English, and we are discussing now how, with the people that do the advertisement for them, how we connect their clients, meaning 400,000 households in Zurich, to collect what goes to the toilet in this plant, to transform it with knowledge of various professions into something that we bring into the Löwenbräu as a minimal / almost land art sculpture. You can imagine that this, there come a lot of questions, but it's only through the trust and the relationship that is built up between the artist and those hosts, who some of them were never that interested in art, some of them were, but many of them were not. But since the artists are asking a lot for professional know-how from them, this is also a way to build bridges between them, and yeah, I think that's what's happening right now there, and we need a lot of help. We have already started like this community, and yes.
Can you maybe give us one or two more examples, concrete examples of how these, it would be interesting I think to hear one or two more examples of how these concrete collaborations happen, you know, because I think it's fascinating that you bring artists together, sometimes with specific practitioners, in some cases like Mike Boucher, with every single person in the city, and create that kind of relation.
I mean, there's also a project with Torben Röttland where we work with a dentist in Zurich, and he asked her that some email conversation before, and then she started to collect all of the tooth from her patients over a while, a couple of months. So we got this, and together with material and tools he found at the dentist practice, he arranged still lifes, but also he was bringing a model into the patient space. Plus, suddenly a patient appeared on the same day of shooting, so he mixed this all up in situations and created his photographs, which we now will present for the first time also in this specific context. All of these satellites is almost, we have main institutions where we show work, but we also go directly to the working spaces and install works in their environment. So in the dental place, for example, we open in 1 month, but it's not including the whole public. It's just for dentists and patients, and of course also the press of dentists, so medical papers. The infrastructure of Manifesta is very much focusing those, in the PR work to really address those specific fields, and the police department write about their art projects. So we're really following these lines where people organize themselves in a profession. They have organs where they write about the projects, and then when this is in the satellite opened, we of course are able to photograph the artworks on site, but we're also able to film. There's also a mediated version where we see the projects. Each of these projects built in the exhibition have three different appearances. One in the satellite, then there's a pendant from the satellite inside of the institutions, and also what we call the Pavilion of Reflections. It's a construction that's floating on Lake Zurich, where we will see videos that are made about the process, and all of them end, the last part of that documentation is always in the satellite. So we see how the specific group of people, what are their expectations on art, what do they make out of it, how do they interpret it, how do they identify with these artworks. And it's possible for the audience that comes to the opening of Manifesta to also connect these different, very insight-specific satellite experiences in this mediated version in the pavilion.
Christian, thank you so much. And maybe this is the moment to hear a little bit more from Casper about Münster, because one of the things, as mentioned initially, with an exhibition which, and it's something Dominique Gonzalez-Förster always says. She says it's the amazing thing of these long intervals, that it always comes back, but there are 10 years in between. And yet, in a way, when one visits Münster, even if most of the works are gone, and as you explained this morning, none of the works are actually destined initially to be permanent, they're all ephemeral. Nevertheless, some of them then stay. So there are some fragments of the exhibition, and it's actually quite interesting walking through Münster. I remember when I visited it once with Raymond, and it wasn't a Kulturprojekt, the city was empty. One sees these fragments, it's like pass pro toto, one can somehow imagine the whole, and we wanted to talk about that a little bit, and connecting it to melancholia.
You see, what is interesting and very particular, this city was destroyed in 1943 in retaliation to the Germans bombing Canterbury, which had no military significance. That was the beginning of the psychological warfare, so to speak. So Münster was bombed heavily by British bombers, and there were fire bombs, and they didn't make craters. So the city, the heat of the bombs just made all the houses, also the historical kind of, 16th, 14th, 15th century kind of setup, crumbled. It just collapsed. But the sewage remained. So there is now this ideology that say Münster is so conservative and so Catholic and so on, they were smart to rebuild. But it's partly true, but the economical basis that the sewage remained made it easy to rebuild it. But after 60 years, there's a patina sort of their time, but it's a kind of a Disneyland, basically. So the whole thing is fake. And there is also a kind of a very affluent, and there's a kind of fake repressive liberalism. Everything is fine. But if you're a little bit out of line, you can be sure that somebody is not emptying your garbage can, and you will make yourself very, very unpleasant, recognizable by your neighbors. So it's a very kind of self-controlled paradise within a high-class consumerist sort of situation. So what we are confronted with is not to be sort of surrounded by all this well-meant propaganda for the city. The reason why I, as an old man, got involved again is simply because they wanted to do it on a 5-year rhythm. And I said, you're not allowed to do it. I go to the highest court, and I was blackmailing them. I had no legal basis, but psychologically it worked. Also because I come from a bourgeois family which is very much present in the city, a tax-paying family, so to speak. So the whole thing is a kind of touch and go. And for instance, Michael Asher was a kind of red line through 4 exhibitions. He made a proposal in 1977. Actually, it was Ben Graham, who was sort of my sparring partner, my intellectual kind of man who supported me and told me what to read and look at and so on. He said, no, I'm not ready. Ask Michael Asher. He's from California. He is not object-oriented. He talks about a kind of a new city, which is not an inner city. It's a kind of network of highways, and Rainer Banham was mentioned. So he had this metaphor of a caravan placed in the center of town, moved every week to another location, into the suburbs and back in. And it was completely ignored in 77. Even well-meaning critical kind of reviews didn't know what to say about it. 10 years later, the same thing happened, and it was criticized for being kind of déjà vu, conceptual art, that kind of stuff we know, not realizing that he basically was one of the inventors. So the last time around, it became a sociological kind of regulation, not continue it, even though the estate wants us to. So we try to stay away from any kind of sentimental reflection and avoid any psychological interpretation. So you rather have a misunderstanding, and then maybe with some kind of delay, it makes sense. The problem we have now is in relationship to the museum. The museum is new, it's very representative, and it represents the province as a place of representation. One night they present a new BMW, the next they have a kind of a feminist congress and this and that. It's a kind of pluralism, but it doesn't mean anything other than creating a kind of a platform where things can happen. So, for instance, there's one interesting detail. There's a work of Lothar Baumgarten. He had a very ambitious project, which was too ambitious, and then finally made a presentation of 3 little bulbs, 40 watts, in the cages of the Anabaptists. And these bulbs hardly are visible. But let's say at 4 in the morning you pass there, and you are not sure if you see these souls, dead souls, if they are there, or if you had too much to drink. You know, it's sort of... Now they have new bulbs, and these bulbs are a little bit too strong. And this magic is gone. And it's not so easy to tell the people who are responsible to tone it down. So it is constructing misunderstandings which survive for quite a long time, if possible. So it's more like as if it's a museum, very high criterion, but it's outdoors, but it is below the horizon. It is a kind of more an attitude against sort of amnesty, against simplistic reading of things. So the first artists we invited now are basically between 25 and 35. They are coming from a kind of hacker scene. They think of themselves as artists, but then the question is, can they do it? Can they find forms? Can they find something which resists, and if it's only for a couple of years?
Now maybe, and that's the sign, the 3-minute sign, so maybe 2 last questions. One to Casper and one to Christian. I wanted to ask you, I mean, when Dominique Gonzalez first told me the other day, preparing this talk, I spoke with her about her views on fragments and traces in relation to Münster. She said, on one hand, there are these fragments and traces of previous shows, but there is also this possibility that the memory of those actually triggers new work, which kind of happened between Oldenburg and Dominique. Can you maybe tell us about that?
Yeah, when Dominique made a proposal, I happen to know her. She was in the seminar when I was years ago. So at that time, she was only interested in Hollywood stars. And when she made a proposal, which was like this bestseller book on the Louvre, making a big story, she made the exhibition of Münster in a miniature. So it was basically a Disneyland proposition. And then people who were adamantly aggressive about the exhibition in 77 and 87, and the local press, they were very touched. They were, in the meantime, grandparents, and they would go with their grandchildren and tell, this is something we hated so much, and so on, but isn't it beautiful? So she had the courage to denounce the system in which we are operating in a very productive way. But there were some old colleagues of mine, like Friedrich Meschen and others, who were very involved in the exhibition, who were adamantly against it, you see? So it was a different kind of reading, right? And now we are involved in, which is quite fashionable, in asking people who are involved in performance and relationship to the body, which is very much interconnected with obviously our electronic communication. So you always take a risk, and you might also falter. But it's important to be willing to take a risk and to support risk on a temporary level, and then after 10 years it's gone. You see, it's very important, 10 years.
And that leads us actually to my question to Christian about your own practice, your artistic practice. You obviously curate Manifesta as an artist, but you have your ongoing artistic practice. And I was curious if you can tell us a little bit about the fragments and the traces in relation to your own works, to your films, to your installations, to your performative works. Because Giorgio Griffa, who is going to talk here in a few minutes, and it's the first time this Giorgio Griffa installing these two works that actually the Turnhalle here becomes an exhibition space as well for painting. Giorgio Griffa says that every fragment is a trace, but not every trace is a fragment. And he says, as I quoted yesterday from him, we can tell that works of art are traces of general human history, but it's difficult to tell if they are fragments too. Perhaps it could be said they are borderless, endless fragments. Can you tell us about fragments and traces in your own artistic practice? And in the meanwhile, it would be great to hear about what you're working on parallel to Manifesta.
I mean, you leave works behind as an artist. You just go from one project to the next, and somehow suddenly you look back and you see the works you did. And this is, of course, trace you leave behind, which also leads you somewhere. You cannot completely invent yourself completely new. There's only one point or a few points and steps where you can go from there. And similar, it's also my approach with Manifesta. Of course, it's very related also to my own art practice, because that's where I had some response and also some experience with by connecting people. Also, sometimes seeing what happens working as the main material, it's always with relations from people. Of course, if you look at my work, it can be many different medias, and but what's left in the end are a lot of relations. So I'm with many people still in a very close connection with whom I work with. People that participated in the work, but also people that made the work possible. I mean, also today there's half of the Manifesta team on their own budget coming up to Engadin Art Talks. And this also shows the involvement of people that are believing in ideas, and of course this leaves longer-lasting relationships. And I think it's also a bit what people should maybe see. I hope in 10 years or somehow looking at Manifesta that many connections have been done. But of course it's also important to hold and capture parts of that. That's why I think always this media formats that you find many times, or mass media formats you find in my work. It's also in a way the mass media format of a biennial of an exhibition, where I, of course, use many of the elements, but satisfying answer or not?
Thank you very much, Kaspar, Christian. Thank you so much. For all your questions to Kaspar and Christian. Other questions? Got a question here, Holger? If you could have the microphone for Holger, please.
I'm not enough. I'd like to know from Christian, if you probably, because your art is always about contextualizing the art system also, if you maybe see the Manifesta as a kind of artwork in your own oeuvre.
Yeah, as I said, I almost think it would limit it completely. It always would put it just into one niche. If I would say this is an artwork, it would make it limited. I think it's always great if one piece in the end can be looked from everybody in a larger facet that you can see. It's simply a show, either good or bad. It's a group show. We produce works. We also contextualize this with some existing works and historic pieces that I have a close relation with. So I think if I would say it's an artwork, it would really make it not very interesting. So of course, but I cannot change it. If I'm fascinated or touched by something, I'm dedicating my time and energy right now to it. And from my attitude, it's not a difference if it's an artwork or this biennial.
Is there a connection to social sculpture? Because the other day we had this conversation here when artists curate exhibitions. I mean, it connects kind of to Holger's questions. Are they social sculptures?
Yeah, it's also just a word, yes.
Thank you. My question's also for Christian. You've been speaking a lot about concrete collaborations and really mentioning a lot of materiality and human-to-human interaction and this concept of artists coming in and working with the local community. I'm just curious on how much of a commentary on labor this is. You haven't really mentioned that kind of key word that I'm really digging out of this, and also just this during the time of kind of the information age and a lot of work being centered more around non-tangible work and labor. I'm just curious how much of this is kind of a commentary on exploring actual physicality of labor and whether you think that that's something urgent now.
I think it comes with the work and the ideas of the artists. So, since the artists are choosing the professions, it's also what they respond to, what's in their interest. But since all of the works are produced in Zurich, with Zurich in 2016, we are touching all of this just reality and also all of the difficulties or all of the great chances you have right now. So of course it will reflect back to it. It makes also another thing quite problematic, or like also, which I find important. The people working with us, the hosts, they are not getting paid nothing. They are doing this on their side. So with the site where people do for money, we didn't buy anybody. They all do it because they are convinced by the concept or by the experiment to do something different, to get out of their normal routine in their working field. Of course, some of them might think, oh, it's also good advertisement for us, but many of them don't, and they're constantly, also pulled by the expectations and the hope of the artist further and further into the projects. And sometimes they say no, or some of the hosts they become more and more artists themselves. Some of the hosts are questioning now the ideas of the artists, and they put themselves more and more in front. So there are a lot of different variations, but of course ultimately it's showing and representing also professions. And for me it's still something that I'm sure we will find in the end when the pieces are there, that they talk for themselves, and you find those limitations or also options and the working conditions in there. Yes.
I think we can take one or two more questions. Caspar, I think you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I can make a comment on money. You see, for Münster it's very important to have a good budget, and as more we have public funding, as more independent we are. So the autonomy is the most important thing in this. And for instance, in '77, I invited, I think, 14 artists. All of them were male. At the time, we didn't even realize how ridiculous it was, because it was sculpture, like architecture, was very male-dominated. However, we learned. And I remember in '77, Boy said, to do work in an outdoor context is ecological kitsch. I said, okay, I understand, but why do you accept the invitation? And he said, we shouldn't leave it to the Americans. Lars Oldenburg and so on. So what is very significant is to learn from yourself to be kind of self-reflective and critical. There's one event which I'm rather proud of, which I think indirectly has to do with the exhibition. In 2018, there is a gathering, which is also 400 years of the Westphalian peace, but there's a gathering of the amateur Catholics. Münster is super Catholic. And the city decided not to support it, because some of the people, not only from the Green Party and from the Social Democrats, but also from the Conservatives, said, why should we finance that? The church is so rich, they are just bringing the amateurs forward, and not to save money. The bishop should pay for it themselves. That public discussion would have not happened without the precedence of what sculpture in Münster was about. And our precedence is strictly aesthetic. It deals with social questions, it deals with psychological questions, it deals very much with traumatic history. However, it is not trying to illustrate anything. So this is, I think, quite interesting to have that point of resistance, and nobody would have ever thought that a place, a provincial town in West Germany, after that traumatic situation, would be able to establish something which legitimately is tradition. So this is quite interesting. That's why I'm back in the game, you see? And it has a very clear structure, and everybody who's involved gets paid, you see? We don't have to have a union, but we are very socially aware that this is real money, and not people who are very smart, who want to work with us and do it free. No, everybody gets paid. It has to be very clear that there are certain social responsibilities, and they have to be met. Fresh water, a window, a toilet for everybody. So for instance, there's one piece of Hans-Peter Feldmann, which is a public toilet, which is in perfect condition now, but it's not a work of art, it's just a very well-functioning toilet. But the idea was proposed by an artist, you see? So that's a difference.
Good now, Kasper, Christian, thank you so much. Thank you all.